This episode is brought to you by Clear Peak Fertility. Clear Peak Fertility and Wellness is the Denver area's newest clinic for inclusive fertility care. That means they support every person's path to parenthood. From fertility consultations, diagnostic workups, women's wellness exams, weight loss support, and treatments like IUI, including donor sperm, they focus on the whole person. Discover expert, compassionate care at clearpeakfertility.com and schedule your consult today. Oh, and if you get in touch this February, Clear Peak is offering a $50 discount on new consults to our listeners. Just let them know you heard about them on CityCast Denver. That's clearpeakfertility.com. This episode is brought to you by the Denver Art Museum. Kick off 2025 with an unforgettable night at the Denver Art Museum's first Untitled Artist Takeover event of the year. It's happening on Friday, January 31st from 6 to 10 p.m. Experience a vibrant night of art, performances, hands-on art making, a pop-up bar, and unique experiences led by local artists Sarah Darlene and King B, plus a whole host of contributing creatives. Untitled Artist Takeover is included in general admission and free for Denver Art Museum members. Reserve your tickets today at denverartmuseum.org. That's denverartmuseum.org. Today on CityCast Denver, more and more Denverites are buying homes with people who are not a romantic partner, and the new interest in co-living is especially strong among young folks, so who knows where this will go next. That's why we headed over to a brand new shared home in Capitol Hill to talk to Sarah Wells, a real estate agent who helps people co-buy homes and says the modern face of cooperative living might not be who you think. Today is Monday, January 27th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Sarah Wells, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited too. Tell me about a little bit about this building that we're in right now.
So we are in the People's Mansion at 1350 Logan, formerly the Starkey School for Household Management. So it's a 12,000 square foot, 11 bedroom mansion that a local nonprofit, the Boulder Housing Coalition, purchased in early December. And we're going to convert it into 18 units of permanently affordable bedrooms.
So prior to this project you're working on, this was a place that trained house staff.
Yeah. It's most commonly referred to as a butler school. I think a lot of people called it a butler school, but they trained like live-in nannies or the staff of Air Force One. So people who were serving higher ups or the uber wealthy would come and live here for a time and train here and learn hospitality. Very different use than what you are going to be doing with it now. Yes, a very different use.
So we were talking earlier about the character of this space and it becoming affordable housing. Can you talk about what is so cool about this building?
A lot is cool about it. I mean, so when we walked through it, considering making an offer, we saw a really large kitchen. We saw multiple living rooms. We saw really big bedrooms. And all of those are characteristics that make for a successful cooperative housing. It's also, one of the largest single family homes I think that we have left in Denver. And so we're excited to fill it with people and excited to be able to pass along like some really beautiful historic fixtures. It's a landmark protected building. So the exterior looks sort of beautiful historic brick and the inside has lots of like wood and hardwood floors. And so if you like old houses, it's kind of a dream.
So you were talking about this, like there's a lot of shared space that would be ideal for what you want to do. The big kitchen, the big living rooms. Can you explain if someone has never lived in or even been into cooperative housing, what is that going to look like in practice?
Yeah. So all cooperatives are different because one of the sort of grounding principles of cooperatives is the residents make the decisions on how they want their housing to feel and be and how it's operated. But in general, in a cooperative home, the bedrooms are individual private space, and the bathrooms and kitchen and living rooms are shared space. So you might have some community agreements about how that space is used or cleaned. The idea is you're like dividing that labor and making agreements about what it takes to make a house comfortable to live in for everyone.
And in exchange for those sorts of rules, what is somebody getting?
Well, I'm admittedly biased because I live in a co-op
Sure.
and I love it and have made it my life's work. But in my opinion, you're getting like there are subjective benefits that you're getting, like a more connected life and greater understanding and empathy for more people of more backgrounds and, a more like family-oriented or familial relationship with people and deep friendships that come from living in and sharing space together. And there are also like objective benefits like more affordable housing, a better or more central location, right? So if you're sharing a space in the city, that's going to be cheaper than an individual space in the suburbs usually. And then you're also getting shared meals. So I find that to be a huge benefit. And then also as a parent living in a co-op, there's some like childcare or like work trade kind of benefits. Like my housemate took my son to school this morning because I had to be here by 9. So I find that to be a huge benefit as well.
Absolutely. I think about something as simple as that, organizing pick up and drop off for your kid, especially if you're somebody whose family doesn't live here. This kind of thing is a way to, I don't want to say solve that, but it's the community that I feel like a lot of people talk about not having right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think we saw a huge increase in that awareness, certainly during and immediately following COVID.
Sure.
And then so my COVID experience was very different than most people living in a house of 8 as a new mom. But we also, see the Surgeon General putting out a report on the loneliness epidemic. And one of the things that they talk about in that report is creating more infrastructure that allows for connection. And I think that's certainly possible in housing and in this type of housing.
So you're taking 10, 11 bedrooms and turning it into, you're going to be hoping to have 19?
18.
18. Okay. And again, like you said, folks are going to be sharing things like kitchen, bathroom. This is different than if you have an apartment and you share a lease with somebody. I've done this before. I shared a bathroom with 6 people, some of whom were strangers when they moved in. And so this is not a hard sell for me, but I can see how this could be hard to comprehend in a world where a lot of times you're looking at an apartment, and now apartments for the most part have not only your own bathroom, but you have your own in-suite laundry and all these things that are considered amenities. How do you sell this to somebody who's used to that sort of individualized living?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to assume that cooperatives are for everyone or shared housing is for everyone. I think we need an ecosystem of housing solutions for all kinds of people. But I would say that the thing to really wrap your mind around is, or I guess one of the concepts that I think about when I talk about shared housing, whether it's ownership or this kind of situation, is to consider like individual pragmatic options and then shared luxury, right? So what does it look like to have just enough space for yourself when you like don't want to talk to anybody else and you just want to get away and lock your door?
Yeah.
And then but when you do want to interact and connect, you can come down to like this library that we're sitting in right now, or living room, or watch a movie together, right? So that you can choose that interaction, and those spaces are designed to draw people out. So I think, knowing that you have some space that is going to be yours is useful. And also like cooperatives are, and especially the cooperatives in the network that purchased this house in Boulder Housing Coalition's properties, really skilled at coaching residents on how to make agreements, right? So it's like, okay, let's think about when you experienced community living in the past. Might have been in college,
Right. That's the one that comes to mind other than your family, growing up.
Yeah, other than growing up. And so when you were in college, you were maybe 19, 20. You didn't really know how to be a grown-up yet. You didn't know how to talk about feeling frustrated that there were dishes in the sink. You didn't know how to make clear agreements about it, right? And so usually when I talk people through that, it's like, okay, how are you different now than when you were in college? Do you feel like you could actually have those conversations? And it takes some practice, but I think that's another benefit of living collectively is like everyday practice in making clear agreements and building trust.
That's cool, though, that you all have that also built in to talk to folks about, because it's something that maybe you don't realize until you get into the situation. Like a lot of times where you're doing that work after the problem happens instead of before the problem. Like in the house that I lived in, we had a chore chart and we wrote down like I purchased toilet paper last time just to like make sure. But it came out of frustrations of assuming people weren't doing their share. So you all do a little bit of that preemptively so folks don't walk into this not knowing how to act, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We do orientations with new residents. We provide like conflict resolution training. BHC specifically has a committee of people that support when there are larger conflicts that need to be mediated beyond interpersonal skills. So we don't presume that everybody's walking in the door with that.
Which is great.
Occasionally I get the question of like, well, what's the difference between a co-op and roommates? Right. And I think that social structure actually is the difference, right? Is like the training, the intentionality of it, and the agreements around shared labor. They're
just some ground rules that help everybody navigate it. So obviously you wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't a demand for this kind of thing. And I'm hearing more and more about these types of cooperative living projects in Denver. Why do you think this co-living trend is growing?
I think there are two reasons, and those are primarily rooted in the benefits I mentioned before, right? Of like affordability and connection. So I work as a real estate agent and I've supported dozens of groups now in buying properties together. And initially they were almost exclusively coming to me because of a need around affordability. And now I'm seeing groups come together because of a desire around connection, right? Like two sisters that are getting married and considering having children around the same time and they want to be next to each other, right? Or like best friends that want to live together, or polycules that are like wanting alternative housing where they can remain connected. There's so many different
intergenerational housing.
Exactly. Yeah. So many different groups that are coming because of a desire around proximity.
I have to say, I have a couple of friends that have done the joint buying and it hasn't ended well. But talking to you, I'm wondering if they didn't have these conversations beforehand. Because you're getting into a financial, if we're talking about co-buying, you're getting into a financial agreement with someone.
Yeah, I would say a financial marriage.
Yes.
And so we teach a co-buying class online and talk about some of the questions you should be asking yourself in advance. We also support buyers in creating a co-buyer agreement, which is a legal agreement that primarily outlines like how your equity and appreciation is managed in your shared ownership, but also what happens in the event of an exit. And so having that spelled out in advance makes those exits much easier, right? Because you made those decisions when you were at the beginning and really cared about each other. Sure. So they're going to be kind and fair, right? And so, buying a house with your spouse isn't really functionally that different from buying a house with friends, just in the transaction process. And we recommend a prenup. Basically.
That's what I was just going to say. I was like, this sounds a lot like a prenup.
Yeah.
But they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
To make things, clean and clear for everybody. You mentioned having a kid and raising a kid in this kind of environment. What is that like? Not everybody wants to live with kids, I guess I would say. How does that work in the co-living model?
Yeah, it was certainly a shift. So my son Charlie is 5, and he was born while we were living there. And I kind of assumed that I would be done living in co-ops once I had a child. And then he was 6 months old when we went into lockdown. I just get choked up every time I talk about it. So cool. I'm not sure I would have come out of that as healthy as I am, right?
It's a lot of work.
It was a really challenging time for everyone. It was an especially challenging time for young parents. Yeah. And so what I realized was how challenging and isolating parenting is. I think no one prepared me for that. Maybe some people get that memo. I didn't.
No.
And so having 6 other people that that cared about him, that could hold him when I needed a break, that really set the groundwork of, I can actually raise my child in this village. And I'm not saying that when people move in, there's an expectation around childcare. It's really if they build a relationship with him, then it kind of happens organically.
Yeah, it's the unofficial trade-offs we have in our own families that we can create in these other families.
Yeah. So I can't really speak to a comparison because it's the only form of parenting that I've known. But I will say it's led to a very connected life for me and for him. And I feel really excited that he's growing up meeting all kinds of different people. It has created some, increased needs around safety, increased conversations around substances, right? So because we have that muscle of talking about things that are important to us and making requests, it's been fine.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny. We went on vacation a couple years ago and we went into the Airbnb and it was empty and he walked into every room and then he came out and he said, "Mama, where is someone?" The idea of an empty house was really foreign to him.
But I love this idea because I think about this a lot. It's so important for kids to have other adults in their lives that they trust that aren't just their parents for a lot of reasons. And this is one possible way to create that community for your kids.
Yeah.
If other people are interested in it, is this co-living model.
Do you plan your vacations based on whether you can speak the local language? With Babbel, language no longer has to be the barrier. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I went to Mexico City a couple of years ago with my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker. So I just let her do all the talking, all of it. I adored the city, and now I'm going to go back in a couple of months, but with my college roommates, who are a bunch of middle-aged men, none of us Spanish speakers. When I was younger, I might not have been bold enough to do that, but now I'm not anxious because Babbel has me covered. Thanks to Babbel, I know how to order a taxi, how to give directions, how to order in a restaurant, all the small and useful bits of language that make international travel easier. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations, especially the sort you need while traveling. Food, how to get places. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you actually need when communicating. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. So I hope I'll see you in Mexico in a couple of months. Or, as we say, espero verte en Mexico en un par de meses. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
So a couple of years ago here in Denver, voters approved a measure that allowed more unrelated people to live together in a single place, like this very house we're in. How did the group living amendment change things for what you all do with these housing co-ops?
Yeah. So I live in a co-op called Queen City here in Capitol Hill. Initially, when we moved in 2015, the law was no more than 2 unrelated adults. And then it changed to no more than 5, which through the group living amendment, that functionally changed the legality of most of the collectives and community housing groups that were here. So it made it possible to talk more publicly about collectives and also to start to map them, which was really exciting.
Because also, like you said, talk about them. A lot of us were doing this before it was legal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I got really good at saying I live in a house with an unspecified number of unrelated adults. So I would say, the group living amendment legalized most, but not all collectives. And now, because of the law, and it also kind of set the stage for Polis ending occupancy restrictions
Across
at
the
state level, right? So now we defer to building and fire code around occupancy, which is a much more logical way to approach
the safety element of it.
Exactly.
Versus the perceptions of what people think when a lot of people live together, I guess. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. I think what really got under my skin for so many years was like, why is it more dangerous for me to live with my friends than to live with my sister? It doesn't make sense.
Well, and prior to the occupancy change, this house couldn't exist the way you want to develop it.
Exactly.
You couldn't have 18 people.
Yeah. So this project is made possible because of that change, which made it really exciting to be doing it just a couple months after that law went into effect. That law changed in July, and we took ownership in December, and we'll probably open sometime this year.
Because it's hard to really, like I said, walking up here, it's a mansion in Capitol Hill for sure, but you don't know until you walk in just the depth of how far it goes and how big it is. And you said 12,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. Easily you could house 18 people. But prior to the occupancy change, it would be no more than 5.
No more than 5.
That would be kind of, it would still kind of feel empty in here, which is, maybe this isn't the typical situation, but this is one of those that's been allowed because of that change.
Exactly.
Which is a great reuse of a building that was not serving its full potential when it came to housing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of potential in reusing historic landmark buildings like this one, right? This building sat on the market for more than 3 years. And because it was landmarked, you couldn't change anything about the exterior, so it made it more difficult for a developer to come in and turn it into condos or apartments.
Sure.
And so the question became, well, what can we do with a big old house? And we knew the answer, but this is the first affordable housing project of its kind for the city of Denver, and it's challenging to be the first of anything. So it was a long process to educate some of our institutional partners around, do people really want to live this way?
Yeah. So I know there are some different models of how to arrange a co-living situation. There's a rental model like you explained. And then this reminds me, there was this company in Denver, Denver, that offered apartment rentals, but promised more of an all-encompassing sort of social club atmosphere. What do you think about this more corporate side of the co-living trend?
Yeah, I think for me, resident control is really important, right? Like one of the things that makes co-ops successful, whether it's a nonprofit co-op like this one or an equity co-op like the one I live in, the residents get to decide how the house is run and how to allocate resources. So we budget together, right? We approve roommates together. And that'll happen here as well. So when residents move in, the Boulder Housing Coalition will choose the initial set of roommates, but after that, roommates will self-select. So that allows for a lot of control and agency. And I think some of the corporate or developer-led models, they don't provide that control to residents, right? So you're not in control of what amenities you have. You're not in control of how things are cared for. And so you're less bought in, right?
Sure.
And so I think some of those corporations, they're trying to create the people-oriented connection without the people. And it's not being very successful, right? It's like the
Denver, I don't think went well. That part of that was the management of the building itself, but I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Well, and that's not the only one. I've been involved with a handful of developers on some potential co-living models as a consultant, and they, anytime we start to talk about, oh, well, the house will need to be cleaned or this kind of thing will happen, there's a distrust of the tenant and a desire to fill that distrust with hiring a contractor to do something. And I actually think the figurative and literal ownership of the building is really important and creates longevity, and longevity creates stability.
Well, and it's this thing that you can't artificially create community. And I think it's such a buzzword when we talk about those more corporate style buildings. It's like, it's community living. But here it feels like it's more of a practice, which is laying the ground rules, making decisions together. Like you said, budgeting. These are things that you're not going to talk about when you're renting at, a corporate building like this. It's like almost like a totally different model, but it is still trying to solve one of the same problems, which is affordability.
Yeah, it is Denver trying to solve affordability.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
It's expensive. I have maybe I have pretty strong feelings about this, but it feels like it's a really extractive model as opposed to a generative model in terms of how do we support people. Like one of the things that a lot of collective houses, when we were in college, had themes, right? Like, this is the vegan house, this is the punk house, yada, yada. And so we've been joking at our co-op at Queen City, what's the theme of our house? And we say that the theme is self-actualization, because you're moving into a community that will support you in finding a job and consult you on whether or not that's a good car payment agreement to make, or
there are all these sort of unwritten benefits.
Yeah.
Which you're saying these things, and I experienced all these things directly in a sort of more unofficial capacity in the house that I lived in. And it was almost hard to articulate to people. Yes, I share a smaller space with a lot of people, but those kinds of things I couldn't get anywhere else.
Right. And I think, that stuff expands. The more we learn to advocate for ourselves or experience connection at home, the more we can do it in our communities. Right. And so when faced with okay, what are we doing nationally, I really feel like expansion of housing that holds, supports, and empowers people can really go a long way in a more participatory democracy even. So
what advice would you have for someone who's listening to this who maybe hates their landlord and is really looking for an alternative?
Yeah. So if you go to the Boulder Housing Coalition website, there's information about the People's Mansion if you're specifically interested in this project. But otherwise, Live Work Denver, which is the real estate team that I work with, we have a lot of information on our website about different styles of community housing. So I think getting oriented around what else is out there, whether it's a co-housing community or other cooperatives, I think is a great first step. And we teach classes about co-buying that sort of orient people around how would you consider this? And then a lot of the groups that we work with just start having conversations with their friends to kind of feel out would anyone else be interested in this or not? I'm hopeful that because the occupancy limits have now changed, that we'll see more collectives and cooperatives visible in the community, and we'll see more of these things come up.
I love the visibility part because this has always been happening since we've been housing ourselves, but it's now becoming something that can be talked about more because it's legal.
Yeah,
which is
we fly a big co-op flag on our front door now. Here we are.
Sarah Wells, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell your old college roommate about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. And if you love the show, come see us in person at Heyday, an indoor fair with urban flair on Saturday, March 8th. Get your tickets now at heydaydenver.com. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. The child diet. I found an old half of a small pepper that I ate part of this morning. That was from last night.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, why throw it in the trash when I could eat it? We're trash monsters.